Over 90 hours or so roughly of playtime later, I have finally finished Elden Ring. Actually took a week off, not only from work, but from working on this channel in order to play Elden Ring. I just sat down and I focused on playing the game. How do I feel about the game now that I have completed it pretty much in its entirety? I'm pretty sure that I have done everything. I have all of the boss achievements at least, so I'm pretty sure that it's all done. This is going to be a spoiler-free review of Elden Ring. I'll have some clips of my second playthrough, roughly the beginning or so of the game playing up here, but other than that, you're not really going to see much from the game, and I definitely won't be spoiling the actual story for you. Okay, Suba. First of all, Elden Ring is a very Souls-like game, which is honestly what I expected, but just to kind of quell any fears that some people might have, if you enjoyed the Souls games, you are going to find a lot of the stuff that you enjoyed from those games in Elden Ring, which I am really grateful for. Because, just to be completely honest with you, when I played Breath of the Wild, I really didn't enjoy it because it didn't have much or any of the stuff that I really enjoyed about the Zelda games in it. It really just wound up being a big, empty, open world with 4 really, honestly, terrible dungeons in it, and then a bunch of mini dungeons that I didn't find to be all that exciting or interesting. So when it came to Elden Ring, I will admit I was a little bit apprehensive. Now, I was excited enough to pre-order it and pre-order the collector's edition and all of that, but I was really nervous that so much was going to change that I just wasn't going to get the same Dark Souls experience that I really wanted and have been craving after my roughly 100, 200, or 300 times beating Dark Souls 3. That's kind of how I was approaching this. I was a little apprehensive, and honestly, they really captured that Souls energy throughout much of this game. It's a very Souls-like experience, and I am extremely grateful for that. I am so glad that I'm able to say that and that I got the Dark Souls experience and then some. It felt like a Dark Souls game that was just bigger and had a lot more content on it than any of the Dark Souls games that have come before it. If you like the Souls games, you are probably going to enjoy Elden Ring as well. And let's talk about all of the extra content, because when I say it's an open world with a ton of content, a lot of people who have played open world games probably are thinking that it's a bunch of content that is really boring and not all that exciting, not interesting, and is really just a repeat of the same thing over and over and over again. I didn't really find that to be the case. Yes, they reuse a bunch of bosses, but I found that each of the boss fights that they reused were done just a little bit differently. The monsters were tweaked a little bit, maybe they had an additional phase, or there were some new aspects to the arena in which you fought them, or usually they were tougher or weaker than their counterparts that you'd encountered elsewhere. Anytime that I got to fight a boss that I had enjoyed fighting before again somewhere else, and I encountered them in a new place, it was pretty exciting. And at least as far as I can remember and as best I can tell, each of these copies of those bosses, it kind of made sense that they existed. It wasn't like they just copied a boss for no reason and there was just no logic to the fact that it was present in this world. So even just the copies of the bosses had their own sort of lore and reason for existing. And you also get new drops and equipment and such from defeating these extra bosses. Ultimately, yeah, you kind of experience the same thing a little bit, but each time you experience it, it's a little bit different. That's also true with the mini dungeons, the catacombs and the caverns and the mines, those sorts of things. Each of those was its own unique design, as opposed to being the exact same thing over and over again. So you got to overcome all of these unique challenges, and right out the gate, there is a ton of stuff that you can do. On my first playthrough, I actually missed the first 2 main bosses that you're supposed to defeat. I went right past them and did a ton of other content. I am somebody who likes to go off the beaten path, and if you go off the beaten path in Elden Ring, you can skip a ton of the main content, and then you have to backtrack and go back to it. So what I'm trying to say here is that all this extra content, if you are just doing a blind playthrough, you're going to have a ton of fun. And honestly, I already wish that I could go back to the time before I'd beaten Elden Ring so I could experience it blind once again and just have a whole new adventure. There is so much content in this game, and after I beat it and was just kind of scrubbing through and trying to find all the content I'd missed, it was like I found a whole other game. I think that it added an extra 20 or so hours of playtime for me because there were entire areas that I had completely missed. This game just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger the more that you play it. There's a reason why a lot of playthroughs are taking north of 100 hours. It's because there is so much to do. Just a standard playthrough where you're just playing the content, you're not wasting a bunch of time, it's gonna take you about 90 to 120 hours.
You are maidenless.
Okay, now I do have something that is a bit of a criticism, but it's kind of hard for me to honestly say if it's a criticism or not. I think that you can do with it what you want, and that's going to be that I kind of felt like Elden Ring was a lot easier than any of the previous From games that I have played. Now, I really don't know if this is because I've just gotten so much better at the FromSoft titles, or if it's because the game genuinely was easier. Now, there's an even easier mode you can do where you summon Spirit Ashes for, I think, all of the boss fights. There might be a couple where you can't, and that definitely makes the game significantly easier, but even with without that, I found the bosses to be pretty easy, at least for the most part. Now, there were a couple that really gave me a challenge and took me north of 10 tries or so, but for the most part, I was able to get it down pretty easily, and most of the bosses were fairly simple for me to tackle. And again, this is with me not going around and farming for runes or anything to level up. I just progressed through the game normally. If I lost my runes, I just kept fighting through, and if I could level up, I would level until I got to what I thought was a pretty optimal level. But most of my runes went into me just upgrading weapons and such and trying out a ton of different builds during my playthrough. So I don't truthfully know if the game is just significantly easier than the other titles, or if it's just that I've played them so much that I'm good enough to not really have much of a challenge when it comes to these titles anymore. And unfortunately, even in playing through my second journey, I found it to be really easy, but that might just be my build or the fact that I'm a little bit higher level than they expected you to be at this point because I did all of the content that I could in my first playthrough. Even in some of those early parts where I was definitely low level because I started as, is it depraved? Is their current one depraved, deprived, whatever it is, whatever the SL1 class is, that's what I started as. That's what I pretty much always start as with a Souls title. Even then, I found most of the bosses to be pushovers for the most part. So it's hard for me to say if this is a criticism or not, and I think I'm gonna leave it up to you. If you are somebody who has religiously played the other From titles, particularly the Dark Souls games, then I think that you might find this to be the easiest among them, except maybe Dark Souls 2, which we don't really talk about anyway. Now, I do have a couple of minor complaints that I want to mention here. The first one is going to be that duo bosses in this game, I don't think they were handled all that well, which is kind of weird because the duo boss that we get in the Ringed City DLC for Dark Souls 3 was a lot of fun. It's actually one of my favorite bosses in the Dark Souls franchise. I thought it was well designed. It was easy for me to keep track of both of the bosses, and I didn't feel like the system of the game was working against me. Whereas in Elden Ring, each of the duo bosses that I fought, it was really just frustrating as opposed to fun. It really just felt like I was dying because the camera was working against me or something along those lines. It was really just frustrating because I can't see what's happening. There's a couple of other really big bosses where that's the case too, because you have no idea what's happening and the system is really just kind of working against you. I'm hoping that's something that ends up getting fixed, but honestly, the duo bosses, all of them that I fought, were my least favorite bosses. And then the next complaint that I want to mention is with your steed. Really not sure how the steed works as far as its own health and stamina and all of that, but honestly, I found the steed to be pretty much useless in fights where the steed was meant to be required. Now, after a while, I got a little bit better at dodging with the steed, but it didn't feel like I had the capabilities that I needed to make the steed a lot of fun. One of the problems with it is that it is really easy for the steed to die to pretty much anything, which can be really frustrating when you're trying to do something like a jousting match against the Knights Cavalry or something along those lines. It would be really cool if we could upgrade our steed, or at least see our steed's stats so that we can know if the horse is getting upgraded. The horse moose thing, it's really not a horse. Technically, it's its own mythical creature. Being able to see its stats and also being able to upgrade and influence them would be nice, and then also having additional move sets added to the steed would be really useful as well. For one, I really would love to be able to do the sort of shoulder check thing that you see the Knights Cavalry doing, where they kind of lurched left or lurch right to knock somebody over. That would have been a really useful move in a lot of circumstances, and I'm honestly not really sure why we didn't get that. It doesn't seem like it would be too challenging to implement, but being able to do something like that mainly just breaks an enemy's poise really would have helped me out in a lot of situations, and it seems weird that the only thing that Torrent can do to get out of the way is dash forward. So those are my two big complaints, is the duo bosses and then our steed. Both of those things I think need some reworking and some updating. I have some other super tiny and very negligible nitpicky complaints, but those are the two that I think are really significant problems that I would like to see fixed or have some quality of life improvements made to. Now, my favorite part of this game, besides the bosses and the combat and all of that, is definitely the Legacy Dungeon. Legacy Dungeons are essentially typical Dark Souls map areas. These are areas of the map where you can't use your steed, you're limited in what you're able to do, and you're really just trying to move from point A to point B. You unlock shortcuts like you typically do in a Dark Souls game, you fight your way through enemies, or in this case, sometimes you sneak your way past some enemies, and you really hope just with all your heart that the next checkpoint is right up ahead so that you can get it. And sometimes you die as you see the checkpoint ahead and you could have gotten it, but you failed. And I loved the Legacy Dungeons. They were so much fun. They were all really unique and interesting, and they gave me that classic Dark Souls feel. If I have to complain about the Legacy Dungeons, it's just that there didn't seem to be enough of these really big Legacy Dungeon areas. So if you are really just looking for another Dark Souls game, honestly, those Legacy Dungeons give you that feel. It felt like playing through some of those classic Dark Souls areas. And there's a bunch of them. There are several areas that you can get to, and some of these areas are really easily missed. I will say that there is a castle that I thought could be a legacy dungeon, then it wound up not being one. It's just really easy to get through and then you're done. So that was a little bit disappointing, but there are several legacy dungeon areas and they are all a lot of fun. And I really hope we get DLC that adds more of these locations. That is what I would really like to see if we get DLC, is another legacy dungeon per DLC, or a couple more legacy dungeons for each DLC. I guess we'll find out. I've got my fingers crossed. One last thing before we get to my overall rating, and that's going to be parkour.
Parkour! Michael, parkour! Parkour!
You are expected to try to break the game. Everybody who has played Skyrim knows that you can very easily break the game by just riding your horse up a mountain, and then you just skip over a ton of content, and it's, I guess, usually the fastest way to get around it. Now, Dark Souls games are no stranger to this. If you've played the Souls games, then you know that sometimes you are actually expected to drop down on certain ledges and such in order to get to special areas or get to unique items. There's a lot of ways that you can break the game, and then it turns out that the developers actually wanted you to go in this direction, or wanted you to roll off that ledge and then land on this thing that didn't seem like it was actually a pathway, but now it really is a pathway. And we get a lot of that in this game, which is really exciting because instead of just the usual controls that we now have a lot of platforming controls. We can jump and crouch and do all of these different things. We have our steed that can double jump to get to areas, and all of these are used to give us access to new locations. And some of them, you really don't have any way of knowing that they are actual areas that you were supposed to get to, which is just crazy, honestly, that I could have easily missed so much content, and I'm wondering if I still missed any content. I'm wondering if there is a place that I could have jumped down to that I missed. Is there a cave that I didn't do or anything like that? And I'm really looking forward to finding something that I missed in my previous playthroughs in the future. So if you look over a railing and you see a roof that is several feet down below, consider jumping over that railing, landing on the roof, and seeing where it takes you. There might be an item or even an entire new area. There could be tons of enemies there and lots of really cool stuff and content that no one else has seen before. And I feel like there's gotta be stuff that people haven't noticed or found yet that we're going to discover in the future. I'm really excited to see how all of that unfolds. I know that a ton of content has already been discovered, although it's not in a super organized place. If you check out the Elden Ring wiki right now, it is just discombobulated and most of it makes no sense or is just incorrect. So I think that the next at least year or so of playing Elden Ring is going to be a fun period of discovery and finding new content. Honestly, it was a bit like finding Ash Lake in Dark Souls 1, because I remember I didn't find that on my first roughly 2 or 3 completely blind playthrough. And when I played on my 4th one, I saw a message on the ground that said there was a hidden wall, and I rolled through it, and then there was another one that said another hidden wall, and I was like, all right, this guy's just trying to trick me, but I rolled through it anyway, and then there's a whole other area back there, and I had completely missed it several times, and it felt like the game just opened up a lot more to me. Loved that moment. That's one of my favorite memories from playing Dark Souls, and you get this a lot in this game, and not just from illusory walls and hidden passageways, but from just jumping across the area and taking some risks and trying to see if you can jump down to a certain ledge and then finding, oh, I landed, now what's next? What's coming up? And then you find a boss that you imagine so many people probably missed. I found so many bosses and areas, and the game just kept expanding because I was willing to take risks and jump off ledges and try to drop down to certain areas, and it took a ton of risks. I died a lot trying to do some of these things, but I also succeeded several times, and there's just so much content there. So if you're playing the game, remember that while this is a From title, it's a little bit different in that now you have all of these parkour things that you can do, and you can jump over that railing and see what's down there. Now, I want to get to my overall rating, but for that, I wanted to let you know that you can like, comment, and subscribe, all at no cost to you, which is just fantastic. Depending on which edition you get, Elden Ring may cost $60 to $90 or whatever dollars, but subscribing to my channel and liking or commenting on this video are free. Thank you very much for taking the time to do those things. I really appreciate it. It greatly helps me out. And now let's get to my overall rating. I think it's going to come as no surprise, and there's no need to tantalize. Elden Ring is definitely a 5-star game for me. I don't know if I'd say I enjoy it more than Dark Souls 3, to be honest, because as far as replay value goes, I'm not sure how much there is to Elden Ring, because as I understand it, New Game Plus doesn't actually add a bunch of content, it just makes the enemies stronger, which is a little bit disappointing. Even from reading online, it sounds like there's not a bunch of +3 versions of talismans waiting for me to discover them, or areas that are unlocked by a second playthrough. Maybe that is going to end up being the case, but as far as I can tell, it's pretty much the same game, just with some tougher enemies, which is a little bit sad. Dark Souls 3, the content was excellent. Honestly, as much as I don't like Dark Souls 2, several of its New Game Plus content was pretty cool. They changed bosses or added events and such to the game, which I think is really cool. Was kind of hoping to see in Elden Ring, but it sounds like that's not the case, or if it is, no one has discovered it yet. I don't know if I like it more than Dark Souls 3 yet, but that's really gonna boil down to personal taste. Regardless of that, it is definitely a 5-star game for me. I loved my journey through the Lands Between, and I cannot wait to watch the 6 to 30 hour video that explains the lore behind this, because there's still so much that I'm really confused about even after having read a bunch of item descriptions. So someone please explain it to me. Thank you very much for taking the time to check out this video. I really appreciate it. If you would like to see another video from me, you can do so by clicking up here. And until next time, bye.